Ladies and gentlemen, how do?
Hello and welcome to Mondo Street Social Club, a new podcast aimed at bringing creative minds together. Mondo Street is about sharing the creative process, discussing the highs and lows, and talking about how we cope when the creative genie eludes us. Pull up your comfy chair, put in your best headphones, and enjoy the next hour. Hello and welcome to Mondo Street Social Club. In this episode, something a little bit different. It's all about me. I thought it'd be handy for us to have a few minutes just talking about me as a podcaster and me as a person. I think one of the things that we miss sometimes is the people behind the microphone, the people that are doing the interviews, the people that have the ideas for the shows, and the people that they're desperately clawing away for your listening viewers and numbers and stats, etc. So what brought me to podcasting? Well, I ran a podcast during the pandemic called Night Driving Without Headlights, which got really quite significant listeners. But I think that was because everyone was trapped in their houses. Good interviews, really enjoyed the format, but I just couldn't keep that up. There was something with the format, there was something with me at that time as we came out of the pandemic. Then joined up with a friend to do one called One Grump or Two, and the whole point about One Grump or Two is that you've got these two middle-aged guys who, as they get older and older and older, become grumpier, and it was just one grump or two, a play on one lump or two, but it was about us talking about our music tastes, our movie tastes, TV, stuff like that. And I suppose when I look back at that, I think the format was fantastic, but it just didn't take off. It was a hard lesson for us, as much as you have a great idea for a podcast or any kind of creative piece of work, it's got to catch the eye and the ear. It's got to find people with the same similar taste. And although we put a heck of a lot of work into that podcast, again, that didn't seem to take off. We had reasonable numbers and reasonable feedback, but I think what we found towards the end was that we were basically entertaining ourselves, and that's wonderful. We used it as a way of keeping in touch with each other. We used it as a way of exploring new music, new movies, new TVs, and that was great. But it wasn't truly something which would reach further, which brings us round to Mondo Street. I remember when I was much, much younger, feels like about 1,000 years ago, where, on a Friday night we'd go to a youth club, and that youth club was in a social club, and there'd be the bar there, and, we weren't allowed anywhere near it, but there'd be a bar there, and of an evening after we'd finished in the youth club, then the adults would move in, and you'd see that whole kind of like community which was being built. It's actual physical community where people spoke to people and people interacted with people. Very different to nowadays, where it's text and it's social media and it's likes and it's comments. And I just thought that, one of the biggest things that's had an impact on my life is creative people. It's people are musicians, painters, authors, poets, lyricists, anything where somebody is being creative. That's always motivated me. That's always caught my attention and always made me want to be part of that journey with them. I think the idea behind the podcast then was to try and bring a community of people together. I know we will never be in the same room, or the likelihood is we won't be in the same room, so we won't have that physical interaction. But the remote, the verbal interaction has been very, very strong. I've been very, very fortunate with the people I've interviewed on the podcast. If I look back to episode 1, which feels like a year ago now, but in reality was only April of this year when it was recorded was Carol Hodge, who's a insanely talented singer-songwriter who plays with so many bands and supports so many artists, that it was the right thing for me to interview somebody like Carol to test the waters, to say, you know, is this something which is going to keep me interested and motivated? Is this something that can find an audience, whether it be 1 or 1 million? Is it something that's worth doing it? And Carol really put a spark under me, you know, with her, how supportive she was of the podcast, how free she was with giving advice and giving her story. And I know that everybody's got a promotional part when they are giving their story, but Carol was something different. And I follow Carol quite closely on social media to see that, you know, she is one of the, I won't say few, because I don't know, I can't do a metric, but she's definitely one of the genuine people out there. And that was a great way for me to start the podcast. You know, I went on from Carol to talk to a guy called Matthew Robinson, who was an award-winning director and writer from Los Angeles, and we had terrible technical troubles with the recording. It was more than probably down to bandwidth, and I'll blame Los Angeles and the sun and the smog and all that. But we had terrible trouble getting that episode recorded. But Matthew was just like really, really patient. And his stories are great. His journey is fantastic. And again, a very, very genuine person. So I sat there in the space of 2 episodes in the UK, reaching out to people who, one was relatively close, and the other one was many, many thousands of miles away. But hearing similarities in the creative process, hearing similarities in how people approach problems, how they approach the things that they deal with in their day-to-day life. And again, Matthew was a guy who was just so giving of his story, and somebody who was so dedicated to his craft and to his task, that again, it just kept on pushing me forward, going, this is the right thing to do. If it's 1 or 1 million listeners, it doesn't matter. It's about hearing people's stories. And again, if I'm the only person that hears that story, I'm blessed. You know, and I don't mean blessed in a religious way, unless that's what you want, how you want to take that, that's fine. But for me, it's a confirmation that you're not, this sounds very, very hippie, but you're not alone in that headspace. Moving on from Matthew, went to Christian Reeve. Again, a guy who's been podcasting for years. He's mostly 200 and, I think at the last time I looked, it was about 226 episodes of his podcast. With his, he's got his Patreon, he's got his other stuff that he does as well. And you think to yourself, that is true podcasting. It's not this thing about, you know, and this is where I went wrong with my first podcast, is you do 4 episodes, you don't see 5,000 downloads, and you go, oh, what's the point then? Christian had that ethos that everybody's got a story, everybody's story deserves to be heard, and if it's only you that hears it, then it's fine, because you are sharing that story with that person. And going back to that social club mentality, that's exactly what it's about. It's about that, you know, that one or many, the talk, the enjoyment, the interaction with people. So I learned a lot from Christian. He was very supportive and continues to be very supportive to this day. And he's a wonderful guy, and he's got so many talents, so many strings to his bow that we talked about imposter syndrome quite a lot on this podcast, purely because of the fact that, you know, creative minds are wired differently and we think differently. When I first looked at Christian's bio, I was a bit like, ooh, God, should I really be interviewing somebody with so many skill sets? But he was great. I actually did a return trip by being interviewed on his podcast, and again, put you at ease. Great interviewer. I then moved on to Christina, my first playwright, somebody who's writing books and producing theatre plays. Christina was a little bit quieter. You know, we had to work on that interview a little bit more, but she was great, you know, and that taught me the art of interviewing. That taught me how to try and bring somebody along to the pace I need. You know, you've got your story. I'll help you to bring that out. I think that was most probably the first week of interviews. I did something like 16 interviews in 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks. So I was learning my craft as I went quite quickly. I then went on to interview Main Street Detour, a punk band from Pittsburgh. The level of energy in that interview, I wasn't quite sure about interviewing multiple people. It'd be the first time that I had 3 people opposite me as an interviewer. It was brilliant. I was kind of like thinking, well, how do I play this? Do I ask individual questions? Do I throw the question in the middle? And let them fight over the scraps of the question? But these guys, they just took it in turn. They were great. And then I've got to say that, as with all the people I have on this, I'm not overly picky. I don't say to somebody, well, you've released 5 albums and nobody's bought any of them, I'm not going to interview you. But everybody I interview, I have something catches my eye about them. And being an old punk from the old days, the energy of Main Street Detour really caught my eye and ear, and I just love them. I think they're great guys. So if you are stateside, go and find them. If not, listen to them. Then my old mate Tommy Taylor. Tommy has been around the music scene for so many years and has taught me so many things about music. He's the kind of musician that if you aspire to be a musician, then the only thing I can say to you is aspire to be like Tommy. He is just so talented. He's one of those guys where you listen to his stuff and you go, all right, I'll retire from writing songs. I'll just stick to podcasting. He's a great guy. Similar with Ollie, Ollie Young, who I interviewed. What a great guy. The wonderful thing about Ollie is that I've spent the last couple of months watching his journey as he follows Bruce Springsteen around and goes to see him in concert, because Ollie's a huge Springsteen fan, and I think Ollie's a wonderful guy, and he gave a great interview, and I think he deserves all the success in the world, because his music is exactly what we need to hear. Proper guitar based, great harmonies, great vocals, and that's exactly what we need. Tanya, I was corrected quite quickly because I said Tanya because I'm from the north. What a great interview. And this is the first guest that I had on that actually stopped me in my tracks when she was talking and doing different vocal takes. I have no idea how to say, I don't know, the car stopped on the corner or welcome to Argos or whatever. I don't know how to do that. That's not in my skill set. I'm sure I could learn it. Tanya's a coach and I'm sure she could teach me that. But the way that she was using her voice during the episode to change the pace and the inflection was just fantastic. And she very graciously did a little vocal tag for us, which we'll be using shortly. So great. And from Tanya, I learned to relax, to be open and to be happy, to listen, to engage. She was just a great guest. Capital Fox from Florida followed. We had a bit of a, I don't know, there were a few technical issues on that one. It was my first interview where the interviewee was in a car. And at one point we were interrupted by the school crossing guard, which I don't think we've ever had before. But they were great guys, and again, such talented, so talented. Sarah Page and Canada. The first thing I'll mention about Sarah is that Sarah has been very, very supportive of the podcast since she came on as a guest. She's one of these people that will repost and share things, which has been great. And her story itself is fascinating. But this mix of being an estates attorney during the day and then a young adult fantasy author of an evening, it's almost as if she's some kind of superhero. She's got this. She's on a mission to give young adults a release from life. So that's her superpower. That's her superpower, is writing these wonderful stories. And she's actually, if you go on Instagram and follow her, she has some really, really good stories. Very funny, great person. Kyle Billy was next. Kyle has got, in my opinion, the greatest voice for a podcast. He's got a slight drawl to it. He's deep. He's raspy. Great guy. Chris, I'm gonna mispronounce your name now, and I do apologise for this, but Chris Tetrault Blay. I think Chris deserves a much wider audience purely because of the breadth of talent that's on display in his writing. Yes, he's moved on to children's books now, but his original horror stories, wow. I love a good horror story. I love that feeling of not knowing where the hand is coming from, or the bogeyman or the boogeyman, whichever way you pronounce it. So Chris needs a much wider audience and fully deserves it. Now, this brings me on to a guy. This is the second guest I had on who really stopped me in my tracks, and this is Noah Martin. Now, Noah's the founder of a company called Retrospection Multimedia, and Noah does a podcast where he's trying to put I'm trying to think what the right word is. He's trying to update, more of the radio plays that might have been around in the 1930s, 1940s. And I think one of the things that Noah gave me was, well, I don't know whether I gave him a bit and then he gave me, but Noah was the first guest who really opened up about their struggles with mental health. And that was awe-inspiring. That, we'll talk about mental health in a little bit after we talk about the guests. But what Noah gave in that interview was quite bare. It was close to the surface. It was more than I asked for and more than I deserved. But he was so wonderfully open, and again, such a talented person. Then let me just get back to my list, because I seem to have lost my list, which is not very professional. Matt Reed, that cheeky Geordie comedian. What can I say about Matt? Well, the thing I'll say about Matt, which is the thing that every comedian wants somebody to say about them, is he is just outright funny. He's right on the button when it comes to observation. Just an amazing comedian. For me, I would recommend that everyone goes onto Matt's website and looks at his tour schedule and has a think about that. What Matt taught me was it was okay to add humour. It was okay that even though the podcast wasn't labelled as a comedy podcast, that there's space and there's time for humour. So thanks, Matt, for that. Johnny Flores, who's a podcaster and owner of a podcast production company over in, I think he's in, I forgot where he's in. This is where I should really do more preparation. He's in America, somewhere very, very warm, no doubt. Johnny was just this mass, this 57 minutes of advice of this story. That Johnny's story was one of, I need a new direction. Which direction do I go in? How can I choose? And it's exactly the kind of story that the podcast wants to hear, so it can help others. Slazarus came along then, and the best rock and roll name was Scott's great grandfather, who was called Wolf Lazarus. Wow. You can just see somebody called Wolf Lazarus, can't you? The 7 foot tall, big boots on, wolf skin thrown over their shoulders, and he's just like belting out these incredible rock tunes. Yeah, brilliant. They're touring at the moment, or doing dates around the south and the southeast, so catch them. And episode 18, which is our previous episode, finished with Paramore GB, who are the UK's #1 tribute band for Paramore. Brilliant. Again, technical difficulties meant that Jay from the band dropped out of the recording after about 15 minutes, which was deeply regrettable. But the rest of the band soldiered on, and we got a really good rapport going, particularly towards the end. You know, it was a great interview. If you like Paramore or that kind of music, give them a listen. You know, they do a really, really good job. Big presence on Instagram, social media, so definitely worth listening to. So, looking back at the guests, then what have I learned? I've learned to listen, to add humour, to think about the questions before I ask them, and to try and relax the person. Because I know when I did Ollie Ying, Ollie had never done a podcast before. Didn't ask him. He just told me, and I'm like, oh, could I have done something slightly different there with Ollie? And maybe if I interviewed Ollie again, I would understand that, you know, he's only done a couple of interviews like that. So what else will this podcast do? You know, if I look at my journey, I've done these podcasts. I've been a musician since I was, well, musician in inverted commas, since I was 14 when I got my first guitar. I've never made any great success from being a musician. I enjoy it, but unfortunately for me, not for everyone else, but for me, my closest friends are far better musicians than I am. So what I tend to do the tweaking. You know, here's a song, tweak this, try and improve it. So my creative outlet now is this podcast, and how I use it is by absorbing the stories of others. You know, everybody out there has, you know, a mental health barometer, gauge, whatever you want to call it, and that's the gauge that goes up and down depending on what time of day it is, or what situation you're in, or the people you've surrounded yourself with, and I've found that I am my gauge, my barometer is more in the healthy and the green. If I spend time with people that interest me and people that motivate me and captivate me. And the thing with running this podcast and being part of the podcast community, that's an important thing, which I'll try and come back to. But having this podcast has allowed me to spend time with people I would never have met. Okay, it's not just because of a geographical location of where I am, but because of the circles that we move in. I would never have met some of these people, and I am incredibly grateful that I've met them, that they took a chance to come on a podcast that was just starting, that they have given their time and their stories and their energy so freely. And that's quite an impressive thing. So that's where my mental health gauge fills up. And I hope that them sharing their stories helps them fill their mental health gauge up. But I think it goes without saying that a lot of people out there struggle with their mental health. And it's not just creative types. It's every person in every walk of life, in every day of life. You know, all of those things, people struggle with it. All I can talk about is my struggle, because my struggle is unique to me. I can empathise with other people's struggles, but I don't think I can sympathise with them. I don't know. Don't think I can. I can't put myself in somebody else's shoes. You can try. I suppose that's what empathy is about. And that's what this podcast is moving towards. So you come on, you talk about your story, who you are, what you do, what you produce. Tell us how you deal with highs and lows. And then if you're comfortable, tell us a little bit more. I'll just cover the other part first before I do this. But having those guests isn't the only part of being a podcaster. If you're lucky, and well, you become part of the podcast community by default. As soon as you release a podcast, you're part of the podcast community. If you're lucky, you start to build up, you know, some relationships. You can call them friendships or buddies or pals or whatever you want to call them. And these are people that you might only know because they've got a podcast, but they can be incredibly supportive as well. You know, you're having a moment of doubt and you put a message out and people go, no, it's try this, try that, try the other. And there are a couple of podcasters out there that have been really, really supportive of me and of this podcast. I'm not going to embarrass people, but I'm going to say, you know who you are. So thank you. You know, this is episode 19. Did I think I'd get to episode 19? I sure hoped I would. But here we are. Episode 20 is a new chapter. We'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, episode 19. So thank you to everybody that's listened to the show. Thank you to everyone that subscribes to the show. Thank you to everybody that looks at the Instagram posts, the Facebook posts, and likes them, or just looks at them, you know. Thank you to all the guests. You guys floor me with how giving you are, how supportive and how giving you are. If you know anybody that wants to come on, get them to get in touch with me, okay? Everybody is welcome on this show. All I ask is that you tell your story and you don't mind a few giggles and you don't mind me being terribly ill-prepared for the questions. We just roll with it on this show. So, episode 20 is the start of a series called Project Hush. Now, why have I called it Project Hush? Project Hush is about mental health. Now, we've already touched on mental health and how people struggle in different ways. But here in the UK, the services to support people with mental health issues or mental health struggles are not failing, but they're under so much pressure that it makes it next to impossible to get support when you need it, unless you are right at the edge. Okay? Now, I'm a firm believer that if we support people before we get to that tipping point, it is easier to bring them back to a more stable platform. Okay? I'm not going to say normal because there is no such thing as normal. Normal is personal. It's how one person feels about getting through their day. Okay? So, Project Hush, this is where people would rather people with mental health just be quiet and sit in the corner. Okay? Take your tablets and hush. Okay? So what I've done is I've reached out to several of the guests who've been on the show previously, and they have, again, generously agreed to do interviews based around their mental health. So this is what Project Hush will be. It will be a series of interviews with previous guests talking about how their mental health has affected them and how it has affected their processes, their output, their lives in general. Okay? What we're going to do is we're going to try and start with an interview between myself and Dan, who's going to be my new co-host coming along. We're going to try and start with that one. Not that either Dan or myself are mental health practitioners or experts, but we've both been through the ringer on different things, different times in our lives. And I think it's important to hear from, in inverted commas, real people. Okay? That's why we're doing us, and then we're doing our guests. Okay? There's no stats, there's no books, there's none of that. It's just people coming on and telling their stories. What I'm going to do as I close the Project Hush season is I'm going to be inviting a mental health practitioner on from a company called Finally Free Therapy. And he'll be talking through some coping mechanisms, some treatments that can be used to help. Now, being the person I am, I'm naturally going to skew towards the creative mind because I truly believe the creative mind is wired slightly differently. Okay? So my questions will be skewed that way. If you're listening to this and you want a different question asking, then email us, show@mondostreet.co.uk. Okay? For me, though, it will be about creative processes, about why does my brain work when I've got 7 chords and I need an 8th chord? Why the lyrics come out and they're all about loss or love or blue skies or whatever. That's what we're going to be talking about. Now, Project Hush won't last forever, okay? It's going to be a series, and I'm hoping that that then bleeds into the main Mondo Street podcast, rather, that we can start adding more mental health awareness, more mental health sessions into the podcast to help people as they come on, okay? It's not going to be a prerequisite because I don't think anybody should be forced to do anything. I don't think it needs to be, you can only come and tell me about your new single if you tell me how you think at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's not going to be anything like that. So that's what we're going to do from episode 20 onwards. We're also going to introduce a couple of new features which will move the podcast again. We're looking at Mondo Movie Madness and Mondo Music Madness. So terribly original names, but hopefully we'll be able to put enough interesting stuff into 1 or 2 episodes over a couple of months. Give the guests a chance to rest their voices. As always, if anything that we've talked about in this podcast has, I don't know, if it spikes something that you feel you want to share and want to come on, then get in touch with us. If it spikes something and you feel that you need support now, then contact Mind, contact the Samaritans. Don't suffer in silence, okay? You are unique as you. Your problems, people are there to support you, okay? So, and remember, it's okay not to be okay, yeah? But if you need help, reach out. This podcast isn't going to become a medical journal, I'm not going to pretend that. But don't struggle. There are people there that can help you when you do need support, okay? So that's just about it from me then. I will continue to be your slightly loony, slightly zany host. One podcast did give me the advice that people need to hear more from me because they need to know who their podcaster is. Hopefully the past half an hour has given you a little bit of an insight. Fingers crossed. Hopefully you continue to enjoy the podcast. The only thing I ask of you is if you do enjoy it, let other people know. Share the good news, share the good spirit. But until next time, thanks a lot for listening. Appreciate you. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you to our guest. As always, please like, share and subscribe. Feel free to hit us up on any of the socials. And our website is www.mondostreet.co.uk. Looking forward to seeing you again on our next episode. Bye.